Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, good, good. How you doing, Brian?
Good. How you doing, Jeff?
Good.
What's what's life been like for the last year and a half, close to 2 years since the wacky pandemic age started?
It's
How
really
you doing?
weird because it's been very strange. I think about the tour we did together, the Melvin's Red Cross tour. We were on the road 2 years ago, right now.
Yeah.
It's just like, and so since then, I don't know. I've been like, think that I would take this time to be creative, do cool things, but the most I can muster is to think about being creative. Like I'm thinking in terms of what it's going to be like when I'm creative again. And the one good thing is I got better on drums. I started playing drums, but that's
Oh,
about it.
all right. So, well, that's cool. I did uh, like for like writing your own stuff or just having fun or whatever, or just playing for fun, that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, yeah. I bought a drum set as my midlife crisis sports car a few years ago. Charlotte, my wife's a musician. She was on tour, and so I bought it when she was gone, so I can hurry up and set up downstairs before she freaked out. It was very kind of a Lucy and Ricky situation, but yeah, and I've just slowly been. I used to be a terrible drummer, and so I'm slowly trying to lose all my bad habits.
Right.
You know, so
What skill level or do you think you're at right now as far as the people that you've admired in drumming? Like, what are you trying to go for, and where are you actually at?
well, I can play very solid and normal type electronic music tempos, but I think I'm a cross between like a current um, electronic music and like 60s garage band.
Well, that's pretty good.
Yeah, yeah. I can't play punk rock because I can't do the oompa 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 very like steadily, but I can play very solid in a mid tempo.
Right. Well, I mean, that stuff is kind of athletic and it's kind of hard to do. And there's like a
Well, with the athletic, I mean, I can play for like 2 hours and just get exhausted and sweaty, but I just don't know the. And you're a drummer, you know it, yeah.
it's called cutting steak. It's called the
Yeah.
cutting steak running the place drum beat, where it looks like you
And
like slice steak real quick.
what is your foot doing?
It's going. It's basically a dum bum dum bum, or there's the cheat beat, which a lot of bands do now when they try to play whatever current version of punk rock is, where they go like, it's like cheating.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And when people go like this, like doka 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 doka, that's that's the unwritten law of what you can never do if you're
Ah,
music like doka doka doka, where you're just like you're not double timing it, you're just going doka 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 doka.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's,
Well, you know
yeah.
what I could surprisingly I haven't but like I think the most complex drums I cannot figure out are the Ramones' first three albums. Have you cracked that code?
You mean basically the style of drumming that Tommy Ramone invented?
Yeah,
That
because
style?
I can't tell what is foot and what's foot and what's floor tom or I don't know what's overdubbed. It seems like there's too many things happening at once.
I think Tommy basically, he wasn't a drummer, so I
Yeah.
think, and then when you hear those records and then watch him play, he can really do it for sure.
Yeah.
He's not as good of a drummer as Marky Ramone is, but Marky Ramone is still not Tommy Ramone, and Tommy Ramone sort of invented it.
Yeah,
So
he did.
um, a lot of people that think that kind of drumming is really easy to play, like whether it's Tommy Ramone or the amount of people that think Ringo Starr got a lucky gig, they don't actually
Right.
listen to playing, or
Yeah, yeah.
the now sadly late Charlie Watts. What a bummer that was, but
That's massive bummer.
massive bummer. But oh, now you're a J on the screen. Uh-oh. Maybe he'll come back. Well, we're gonna wait here for a second, kids, and see if Jeff figures out what to do. But yeah, Charlie Watts. But he made it to 80 years old, and that's that's pretty good. 80 years old is not really young, for sure. There he is. Hold on. Let's see if Jeff can go back in there. There you are.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. But yeah, Charlie Watts. How are you dealing with the loss of Charlie Watts? I know how beloved the Stones are to you.
Yeah, it's a bummer. I mean, the last time I saw the Stones play live was at the Coachella. They had they called it Old Cella, and it was Rolling Stones, The Who, and all this, and all the classic bands, Bob Dylan, and Charlie Watts was probably one of the most impressive people on the whole show. I mean, it was just like the Stones did an incredibly stripped down set. They didn't have their gigantic stage set, and they just kind of played like they would at a normal, like at the Forum in 1975. And it was by far the best I'd ever seen them. And I'd seen them, since, maybe since Tattoo You, I've only been fortunate enough to see them in those tours. But yeah, he was so great. And it's a really good example of how great he is that Martin Scorsese film, Shine a Light, which it seems like it'd be lame, but actually Charlie, really, just really shows how amazing he was.
Oh yeah, he's really great, and he's another one of those people that people just think it's easy to play like what he does, and then he has the whole lifting off thing where it's try to do that. That's well, first off, I play completely wrong. I play open-handed. I don't know who does that. But not
left-handed?
Yeah, I'm left-handed, but I play open-handed on a right-hand kit because there was no one there to tell me to do this. Because
Dennis Wilson did that.
Yes, all those early Beach Boys appearances, he's just clubbing away with a hi-hat and one cymbal and nothing else. Basic work.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, that sucks about Charlie Watts, but 80. That's pretty. I don't know. I mean, he made it to 80. That's pretty good.
Go ahead.
Well, my point of bringing up him, not just because it's a bummer, but also because he kind of fits in with people like Ringo Starr and Tommy Ramone.
Yeah.
And then the guy that plays drums in AC/DC, his name is Phil. That guy is an incredible drummer. All those guys are incredible, but they're just they're very stripped down and solid, and people think that stuff is really easy to play, and I defy anybody to really sit down and play any of those songs the way any of those guys do it, and they're not going to be able to do it because it's a feel thing, all those guys.
Yeah. I remember in the 80s when we would need a new drummer, we would try out a lot of people who were of the kind of Neil Peart or whatever was happening in the more heavy rock scene, and you couldn't get them to play a shuffle. They couldn't play Ringo to save their life. And then these people were basically pretty technically good. They just hadn't started with that stuff. They had no idea. Yeah. They didn't understand it.
Yeah, it's like guitar players that can sit and noodle and play brilliant technical stuff on guitar, but they couldn't write a halfway decent song to save their life because that's not what their skill set is, kind of thing,
Well, that's YouTube, you see 14-year-old girl from Brazil playing Eruption perfectly. And I just wow, there's so many good little kids who can play like Eddie Van Halen, but I wonder when they leave the comfort of doing something like that, what happens? I don't know if the magic continues, or I hope it does.
I'm sure it does. They have to figure it out on their own, I guess. So.
Yeah.
But so you've just been just staying indoors and trying to avoid being sick for this entire almost 2-year period?
Yeah, I've been really good about it. I mean, both my parents are still alive, and I thought we were going to have to really, hammer them, but they were really paranoid. So it was great. They got shots really early on. So I have a small bubble, I have my immediate family and just a couple members of the extended family. I don't know how to deal with more than two people at a time. I went into guitar. I mean, I wear a mask everywhere I go in Los Angeles, and I'm really good about being very, careful. Went into Guitar Center to buy a stand for my tom, my rack tom, and it's just and I barely know how to speak English to people. Like it's just like I don't know how to ask for simple things. So it's kind of fun because it's a rebirth of sorts.
Right. Well, in some ways, it sounds like nothing has really changed. Yeah, we haven't gotten anywhere, and I'm very paranoid too. And I have, my daughter has, she had open heart surgery when she was like 5 months old, and she has Down and autism. And there's just no fucking way I, good faith, could let her even be a part of anything until the children's vaccine gets, at least there'll be some protection. And so in a lot of ways for me, nothing's really changed, other than I've just had to hunker down and just reinvent myself a little bit more as a guy that's going to draw every day and get as much work.
I see. You would think that I mean, that's exactly what I would hope for, to reinvent myself and to do something creative every day. But yeah, I think I might get there, but it's 2 years in. I don't know. I don't ever give up. But I mean, I mean, I don't know how you deal with, like, I'm sure where you live, people. I mean, how are the masks? What is the mask situation when you go to the store?
Well, in Raleigh, it's a little bit more. I'm not even going to say politically orientated. Let's just say people really are a little bit more. I'm going to say educated. Educated bit of the internet. Telling you what to think. So it's not so bad. But there's stupid people everywhere, and around here it's gone down. It seems like the only thing I can think now is just like, I think the freedoms that these people are talking about is just basically they just want freedom from responsibility,
and freedom to be an asshole.
Right. They just want freedom. They just want freedom to. I mean, I don't like most people in general. I don't like thinking that, but it's like I'm still gonna do my part. I'm still, because you live in a society where you have to. Nothing like this has ever happened. So to me, I thought it was pretty clear and obvious what had to be done, and that everybody would put aside whatever, I have to be on this team, and I'm this person. That means you're that person. And here's my team, and this is your team. And I would have thought the pandemic would have just cut through all that bullshit, and everybody would have said, "Fuck, man, I don't want people to die. I don't even like most people, but I don't want anybody to die. We should just all do this for a few months and just get through it." And I was really very nonplussed at the reaction and what it continues to be. So it's almost like I'm just waiting for the other half of the world to be a little less stupid and just get on with it. And it's like,
I know
they're just like digging their heels in. Like, it's crazy. Well,
the thing. Well, one thing though, I quickly, when it started, I immediately thought, oh, this is our Dust Bowl. This is our Depression. This is our World War II. And people were expected to do, their part. And without question, that was the patriotic thing to do. And you would make certain sacrifices. What is, we're not being asked to sacrifice. Okay, you're right. All right, I've said enough.
Hey, let's ask you some really probing questions. If you don't mind.
No.
I talked to your brother on one of these things like a year ago, and I kind of got to know him first on some of those tours, and then when Redd Kross came on that last tour, it's when I actually formally met you and stuff. And your brother said that you were definitely sort of a Pied Piper in your household, bringing home all these interesting records, but you're like bringing home and being exposed to really interesting stuff when you're like, what, 7, 8 years old? Were you
Yeah.
what exactly were you like reading things like Cream magazine as a really small kid and just going, that seems interesting. I'm gonna go check that out.
Yeah, I don't think, well, I mean, yeah, 10, Cream magazine didn't, I mean, it didn't really come into my life until the mid 70s. So I guess I was a little kid. Yeah, I mean, we had aunts and uncles and people in like, teenagers who had record collections on our streets. And I was always just really attracted to records and I would just love listening to them. So the weirder, the better.
Sure.
We had a couple of, like the next door neighbor kids were kind of into Hollywood music. So they had the New York Dolls and early Alice Cooper. Right when they came out, no one in our neighborhood knew what that music was. It wasn't popular. So we got exposed to it. I got exposed to it very early. So the minute I can scrounge together some cash, I started buying records.
Right. So it was mainly just being exposed to other people that knew about records and stuff and having some relatives and things like that.
Yeah, who had good taste.
Yeah. And what did your parents think about you and Steve checking out rock music at a young age? Didn't they like drive you to see Kiss and things like that? Like
Yeah.
76 or 77, like that?
Yeah. So we lived like about 2 miles from the Forum, which was the Madison Square Garden of Los Angeles. So everyone came through. And the shows got out fairly early. So we would kind of frame it as, oh, it's like going to the movies, you drive us to the movies, it gets out at 11, so usually, we would be able to talk them into it. If it's a really special show, something that we really like, they'd be okay about it. It wasn't until, our teens, my teens, that I started working on them with about the Whiskey A Go-Go and the Starwood and those kind of places, because we lived about 20 miles from Hollywood.
Yeah.
And it would be like, fortunately the Whiskey A Go-Go had 2 shows a night, so they would have an early show. So I think I would kind of frame it as like, make a night of it. You come and just hang out, and you can just drive around and it'll be over before you know it. We'll be outside by 11 o'clock. So we were able to do that occasionally, but it's insane. Like the nightclubs of the late 70s and LA, the Whiskey and the Starwood, the shows that they would have were just insane. I was looking at some guy post, all these show calendars for the Starwood, and it would be like Boyster Cult, The Runaways, Captain Beefheart, and then Snow and Equius. I mean, there's just like it was so diverse. That was our Bill Graham moment, that kind of late 70s Whiskey Starwood period. It's kind of before people had the big Palladium shows, and the only place to see original music was at one of those venues. But I get, but it was hard to be booked in those venues because you had to have a record deal. In order to have a record deal, you had to have a fan base and write your own songs. And people didn't do that. Young musicians didn't write their own songs in the early 70s. In the mid 70s, the groups that in our neighborhood that were really big, there was a group called Rage, and they were like the backyard party band that had the full-on Marshall stacks, full-on just go and drool at their gear, but they just played cover songs. So they were a lot like Van Halen. Van Halen broke out of that, but Van Halen was very kind of typical of what the bands we were exposed to when we were teenagers.
Right.
And then
Oh, go ahead.
So when the Ramones, so with Ramones, Blondie, and Runaways, I started seeing like, oh my God, they're playing at this place. They're playing, then it's a small place. It's not huge. Cause the Forum, I was always like colonnade section. We would get there super early and still get last row seats constantly in those days, But it was just a question. That was the big mission, to get our parents to drive us. And, they did occasionally, until we started hanging out with people who had cars, but there was a good 2 years.
Right. Yeah. and people think, when you discover that you really like and you're attracted to music and rock music, and you get a chance to see it, and you're learning about all these bands, that's a very exciting. I mean, forget about punk rock. Even before, well, of course, before punk rock. That's a very strong great feeling to just, it's almost like you're coming into your own. There's like suddenly something that you're kind of interested in, that you're attracted to, and you could maybe, who knows, you might even be able to make a friend with somebody else that liked Aerosmith Rocks or the first Cheap Trick record, and maybe the first record or whatever. Yeah.
Well, all those original early people are kids my age. There was a handful of them, or the original punk rock people. They all had that in common. Everyone loved the Runaways, Cheap Trick, even like Queen, even, it just all, that kind of just weirdo popular music. Everyone liked that stuff.
Oh yeah, Queen was great. Who sounds like Queen even to this day? No one.
No one. No.
Yeah. So when was it about the time when you guys decided, well, maybe we'll try to do our own band? And also, I was kind of curious about your affiliation with the early SST scene. And I have one specific question about that. But like, what was the attraction of just going, well, my brother can sort of play bass, and I met this Greg Hetson guy in school and whatever, like we should do this. How long was the process of actually putting Redd Kross together? And from that point onward, what was your first show?
Well, okay, so Rodney Bingenheimer, his show was insanely great, and he would occasionally play. He played a lot of the amazing LA bands didn't have records, and so he would play their tapes. And we thought, wow, if you only had a tape, Rodney might play you. And so like I would think from seeing the band Rage and Cat Stevens, those two elements kind of were, and the Ramones. It was I loved Cat Stevens as a kid, and I had a Cat Stevens guitar chord book, and I had enough natural talent to know like where to change the chords in the middle. I couldn't read the music, but I could read the chord diagrams. So I learned how to play all early Cat Stevens songs, sort of.
Awesome.
And then that group Rage, when I realized I'm not going to be able to learn how to play this Led Zeppelin stuff, so we just started writing our own songs. I learned the bar chords. Ramones came in, Runaways, Ramones. I kind of started learning their songs, and then we just started writing our own song. So that was right before I found a guitar player. Like I knew there was a drummer because Steven was in his grammar school orchestra with this kid who had a drum set, and that turned out to be John Stilo, who's on Born Innocent, and Greg Hetson. There were a couple of people who had electric guitars in Hawthorne and I would just go up and talk to them, and a couple of them came over to the house. But I know Greg was the first one that we really kind of like clicked with, and Greg was the first person who had ever been to a punk show. I met him in ninth grade. I was in a photography class, and I had taken pictures at the Whiskey of X or something, and he had taken pictures of the Dickies. So that's when we became friends. And then, so that's about there. He was like, didn't want to play with Steve because Steve was 11. But, but the songs started coming to us very quickly. Like we just had these, all the early Redd Kross songs they just kind of sounded instantly good. And, so that's how we got going. And like, that was probably early part of 78. Cause we were playing by the end of 78. So I think Steven's really good with the dates, but we're still in the late 70s.
Okay. All right. So so stuff like what was on the Posh Boy 12-inch, and maybe stuff like Rich Brat, which ended up on Weirdo compilation, stuff like that.
Right. That was from our original demo. We didn't record that one when we did the Posh Boy recordings. They're basically were just a copy of our original demos that we paid for.
Oh, I thought Steven paid. Your brother said that.
Well, he did. Steven had a Daily Breeze paper route, and Daily Breeze was like the popular paper in our neighborhood, and it was like. So he had a lot of customers, and with paper routes, like you would make like in those days, like $30 a month, just for such responsibility too. But he was good, and he'd get tips. That's where you make all your money. That's where you learn that game. It's all in tips. So recording studios were probably like about in those days $25 an hour. So it was several months' wages for him, but he didn't have to support himself at the time. So,
Yeah, it's a little different when you're like 12 years old or 11 years old, paper out, and you have this incredible project you're focusing all of your money on, and yeah, it's a little different. So Posh Boy, how did that all happen? And before you answer, I got to tell you something really funny. In the last couple months, and I have no idea why he found me, but Posh Boy Robbie Fields is aware of my existence and has actually paid me money for a bunch of prints, and he's been very supportive and generous. And this is literally from like maybe 3 months ago. I guess he lives somewhere in Europe or whatever. I don't really know. But yeah, the idea of Posh Boy writing to me through the email 40 years later is really odd. And
well, he's another person that would recognize something in you. I mean, he did have good taste.
Yeah, he definitely got a lot of put a lot of stuff out that is very highly regarded and classic. Did he just like? Is it true that he signed you guys to his label after your first show?
Maybe it was after our first show in Los Angeles. I think so. I mean, I don't recall signing anything. Right. I mean, but yeah, like he had like a suit. He was like kind of like he was kind of like that Brian Epstein figure on the scene. Like he dressed very straight, very like he was the businessman, old timey A&R person, kind of like from the Spectre LA kind of thing. And and of course the kids, you think that he's a shark, he's the man, but it turned out to be, he gave us all our first our first opportunities to make records in a time where now anyone could record songs and put them out or even press their own records, but at that time it was really a big deal to have a record out. They were very expensive, and there was no way to have them distributed, or there was nothing in place yet.
Right. And that's what got you to, I think it was, for me, the first punk rock record I heard was the first Ronnie Bingenheimer Roddy on the Rock record after it came out, because my uncle had it. So you're on that, everybody from Rick Elric to Black Flag and the Minutemen and Circle Jerks are all on it, Adolescents, whatever. And that was sort of like a for lack of better words, I guess, hardcore or whatever.
Yeah.
And I liked that stuff, but I kind of gravitated more toward the early SST, like some of the same people that you guys knew and played shows with. And Steven likes to tell the story about how you guys auditioned to be Black Flag's friends so you could play a show with them and stuff. Is there any truth to that story? Is that involved at all? Or?
Yeah, it was kind of like that. I mean, in those days before the internet, and you're like this enterprising kid and you want to figure out how to bust into some kind of scene, we were lucky enough to see a DIY show that Black Flag put out in our actual neighborhood, like in Redondo Beach, near where we live. And they weren't from Hollywood, and I tracked them down. I figured out where their phone number from their record. And I started calling Greg Ginn up, and he would talk. Greg Ginn would chat about music, and he was the kind of like slightly older kind of scene. He was really into help. He really wanted to build like a scene around their bands. So it was good. We brought in new blood. It was like all of us. He goes, "Yeah, sure, come down and we're going to rehearse. We're going to practice tonight. Come down and you can watch us practice. A few people are coming over." So like, I think it was like Janet Housden. That's where we met Janet Housden, and then Joe Nolte from The Last, and Mary Rat and Ellen. So these people, it was just like about five or six extra people. And as we watched them, and then they just said, "Okay, why don't you play?" I don't think we knew we were going to play. So we then after they played, we played a set in front of like this, like 10 people. That would actually, most of them would become lifelong friends. We've known, we're still in contact with. But yeah, so they were, "You're great, really good." Keith, I remember Keith compared us to Eater. Remember that English band?
Sure.
They had like a 10-year-old drummer. We were a lot better actually. They were way more garbagey than us. But yeah. So they were into it, and they were just on the verge of breaking into the Los Angeles scene, and doing shows in LA, and they asked us if we wanted to play on them. I think the first shows they played in Hollywood were really Hollywood. They were in Chinatown. There was like a summer of music in Chinatown, or a year of music in Chinatown, and before the cops came in and closed it all down. And yeah, so they put us on all those bills. And that's where the Hollywood people saw us, and people from Orange County. And, so that's where we got to really kind of get going. And Robbie scouted us, and Rodney started playing us. It was like old timey excitement. Because there was no, in those days, there wasn't even a single band that ever thought in terms of, I'm going to get a big record deal and have a huge hit record. I mean, the music of the late 70s, the popular music of the late 70s was so bad that it was like, if the people want that, we want nothing to do with it. You know what I mean? So it was like, everyone just wanted to just get as far as they could get within their own world, their own scene or whatever.
Right. And the SST question was about, I just sort of always assumed that you guys would eventually, when I used to read Flipside and stuff, 50 years ago, or when all that stuff was going on, because you guys played all these shows with all those SST bands, I just always assumed eventually there'd be a Redd Kross SST record, and that never actually happened. And I think since wondering that, I kind of realized that when I listened to a lot of the SST like interviews of all the people, all the main players, that it's kind of cult-like and sort of kind of I mean, it's not an insult, it's like they've created their own little thing. It was a really powerful thing, but they all kind of sort of talk the same, and the SST record never, they never asked you, or you never wanted to be a part of it. Was it more like you guys were just like, well, this is cool and they're cool, but I think we need to do our own thing and not really be affiliated with that kind of stuff?
Well, yeah, I mean, it wasn't really the bands, but it was like when they started really kind of gelling, and the new people that were coming into like the behind the scenes SST thing, it was a complete and total cult, and it was scary. So, I mean, I still love those people, but not really interested in plugging into that singular personality, because we're developing on our own personality. And it's really funny that we can accuse them of being a cult, but Greg Ginn, I think, told Thurston or something about, when he was asking about, why didn't you ever sign Redd Kross? How come Redd Kross never did SST record? And he said, well, they just wanted to be Motley Crue. There was nothing I could do for them.
Really? I don't think Greg Ginn really understood you. He thought that you wanted to be Motley Crue, or maybe he doesn't. I guess he doesn't know what Motley Crue sounds like either.
No.
It's like that'd be like me reading a review of the My War Black Flag album. It came out. When it came out, it was reviewed in the second most famous punk rock fanzine of the day, Maximum Rock and Roll. Right. By the late editor, and he said, this sounds like Black Flag impersonating Iron Maiden on a bad day. And and I loved My War instantly when I And so that's when I knew, well, he doesn't know what he's talking about, because Black Flag, nothing like Iron Maiden. I should know. I've been very vested in both bands over the years, So well, that's kind of weird. But
well, that was an amazing thing, because like when I would meet someone in the old days, I just go through their records immediately. And Greg, when I met Greg, I was like, oh wow, he had like all these like golden records that I wish I had, and he also had Black Oak, Arkansas, which I thought, wow, I mean, I can relate to this. We were also into Black Oak, Arkansas, but yeah, the whole thing about Iron Maiden and My War. Yeah, that was strange, because it was weird for us to hear like the Damaged LP, because we knew it from Keith. We knew all that. We knew all those songs from the original Black Flag, and then the Dez and Ron period. And so it was weird hearing them with Henry to have that kind of perspective. I mean, the normal person would just hear them as great, but so it was kind of a little snobby on our part. But My War, I loved that too, because I know the inner workings of the band. They thought they were making a Dio style record. And I knew that this is nothing like Dio.
That's fucking crazy. And I remember Bill Stevenson had a Dio KLOS. Remember the
yeah.
He had a big Dio on his rack tom when I saw him in Black Flag, and I was like, I guess that must be against Dio though if he thinks that My War sounds like Dio, because it really it just doesn't. And actually, the production of that record sounds like somebody poured like a bunch of enamel all over the recording to remove every bit of high end. I mean, I love the way it sounds. It sounds bad, but it sounds bad under somebody's, I guess, warped vision of what they think, like
in the classic garage band sense, it's like garbage. It's like garbage garage rock and roll.
Right. But it was like, that record was kind of like, and I actually see a similarity between My War and Redd Kross, which I'll get to in a second. Which is basically like, it was almost like if you hated that record, then you were probably an idiot. Right. You were probably a punk rock mohawk. I'm really, I'm going to be skanking down the bowling alley when I'm going to be playing a few games, and I'm going to be annoying to people and that kind of thing. And I always kind of equated Redd Kross in a different way as being very nonconformist, because you guys didn't act like music only began with punk rock and hardcore. Yeah. And actually, the Teen Babes record kind of was a real Pied Piper record for me at the time, because as much as I would love to act like, me talking to you now, I'd love to sit here and act like I was, yeah, man, I bought Cream Magazine and I was listening to the Stones. No, not the Stones. I was listening to Funhouse in 1982, but that would be a lie. I mean, that would be a complete lie. And you guys, introduced all these other kinds of bands that I really just hadn't really heard, and it was your versions of like the David Bowie song from Man Who Sold the World, kind of introducing me to a lot of that stuff. And I definitely credit you guys with that. And because you guys just sort of did what you wanted, and I know that you and your brother to some degree reacted very poorly to this element of punk rock.
Yeah. Well, there was a bad year.
Yeah. And like, I was attracted to like Black Flag because, not just because of the sound, but because they looked like regular people, and some of them even had long hair, like Dez, Yeah. And I hadn't really figured it out. I thought that if you liked this music and if you went to those shows, you'd get beat up, or, and I just always looked like a regular person. And Black Flag and Redd Kross and a bunch of other bands were just like, no, we like all this older music and we're just going to do what we want. And it seemed really almost more punk rock than most punk rock. Like Born Innocent was a very kind of anti-punk rock, but very punk rock record, if that makes any sense. And you recorded that in Moore Park, which is down the street from where I grew up.
Yeah, we did.
How did you meet that guy in RF?
Felix? Yeah. I don't remember how we met, but in those days, it was like people would pass around phone numbers. Like you'd sit down and make your calls. Like, who do you need to know in order to play? Or if you want to play with this band, call them and get to know them on the phone. I made all my friends on the phone. So Felix was one of those guys, and he had a job. So he was going to he wanted to put out some records. He was putting out his own record. So he wanted to do a couple of compilation albums that so he could be on it, which was smart with other bands.
Public service.
Yeah, which they're very weird. That like his compilation albums are like amongst the weirdest. Not necessarily the most popular, but some of the strangest ones that come out at the time.
No, and I liked RF7, and everybody fucking hated them. They're just like, almost for some of the same reasons I like some of this other stuff. They just look like long-haired creeps. You know, they didn't have skinheads and things like that.
No.
And then anyway, I'm really jumping ahead of myself.
But you know what's really interesting? You were talking about you know, the original Black Flag and then the original Redd Kross. Everyone had their kind of like local hits. And then by the time Redd Kross and Teen Babes and they were doing My War, both groups were really doing, you know, we were finding new audiences, but there was that time when nobody was showing up because it was just like no one wanted either band. And like I remember playing with Black Flag at the Cafe de Grand, there was like no one there. You know, there was like these really lightly attended shows around that time because people, you know, it was their music was so weird and they were so into their weird singular personality and just they were scared people.
Cult like take no prisoners each mentality, which is very respectable, but
I think it's amazing, but yeah, I didn't want to be in it. And the thing is, like, it's always really funny when I think about Henry Rollins. Like, Henry Rollins is the one person, like, he does never even, I don't think ever even considers doing any kind of like reunion show with those guys.
Sure.
I think he's afraid of that, being sucked back into that world.
Well, you know, I mean,
now he's developed enough of a personality. No, he's not. But I mean, but he was in the thick of it, and he wasn't the creator of it. I don't even really know who. I don't know. Followers were Bill Stevenson for sure. Like people like Bill Stevenson and Frank Navetta from the Descendants. They also created their own cults that were there. You know, it's weird. I think it's like a weird South Bay, Southern California thing. It's like the Descendants had their own language. They had their own kind of world bubble that you'd only get your big toe in, and you know, like they were just very weird. And you know, it's the same way with the Minutemen. Like with someone like Mike Watt, you know, he's kind of weird to talk to because he speaks and it's like Watt from Pedro. We were friends. Yeah, we were friends. And Robert Hecker, our guitar player, went to the same school with the Descendants, so he speaks their language. So we would learn a lot of how to communicate with them through him. And then, you know, then there's crossover between like how Robert and Bill and Frank talked with Mike Watt, and we were friends with Dennis and D. Boone, and he was more normal than, you know, than the rest of those Mike Watt. It is weird. Yeah, very culty, but a very strange cult, and we all were forced to deal with each other in a really kind of fun way. I don't think all the bands really understood each other. It wasn't like we were all in it together. I think everyone was weird and eccentric enough, but to know that, we should do shows with Minutemen. We should do shows with 3 o'clock. And, you know, we should all hang out together, even if we're coming from a different place.
Starvation Army, Sacred Trust, you name it.
Yeah.
What about Mood of Defiance? Were you into Mood of Defiance?
Yes, they were great. Mood of Defiance. One of the members of Mood of Defiance was actually from Hawthorne. But I think, again, 2 of them were from Hawthorne, actually. We didn't go to school with them. Danny and Gary Cale. Gary Cale, he also had his own record label.
New Underground.
What was the name of his record label?
New Underground. He put out all those weird records. That Life is So Clever. Oh, which brings me to the Blue Cheer cover.
Okay, yeah.
The one that Des sang and you sang backup, I'm guessing. The very short-lived version of Redd Kross after Tracy quit.
Right.
Des came back to the band. Is there any other? I've always wondered this. I've wondered this for 30 years because I love that cover. And actually, that was the song that introduced me to Blue Cheer, to be honest.
Oh, good. I
never heard Blue Cheer before your cover of Out of Focus. Is there any other recordings from that short-lived period of anything?
You know, I don't know, because that was around the time we were rehearsing for Teen Babes. But Janet plays drums on Out of Focus. So yeah, it was like kind of just pre-Teen Babes, and we were kind of doing some covers. We were learning covers, But I don't know that from that session if there's anything we did with Des. I'm not sure. I don't know, and it's weird because we played together for a couple years. Well, wait a minute. Let me say one thing about Out of Focus. Someone told me that Rick Rubin, that was his favorite Redd Kross song. He thought that was a Redd Kross song. So
I'm sure I did for a little bit. Eventually, yeah. I was like, oh, this is Blue Cheer. Oh, Summertime Blues, those guys. Okay, yeah. So I have to ask you about hardcore.
Okay.
I really did like a lot of hardcore, and but I liked all the other stuff I like too. But I feel like I can totally understand reacting so negatively against it, especially just what had come before was just sort of like there was this stamp of, and we talked about all the weird SST bands and other bands of the time period that Redd Kross played with. And what people don't understand when you talk about those mythical old days is that there was like this thing where everybody was sort of like sounded different than the other band. Everybody was, you know, there's like individuality from, you know, X to Germs to Dream Syndicate to, you know, whatever. Everybody sounded different than the next band. And then here comes hardcore. And suddenly, and I always use Reagan's End by Wasted Youth, not because I think it's a horrible record, but because they seem like just the blueprint for Southern California stereotypical hardcore, like Reagan's End and We're on Heroin and You're a Jerk. And especially my big favorite was the song Uni High B-Frag. I just
oh, that was
a poetic phrase. So,
oh my God. All the people that went to Uni High too.
Yeah. So I just always, I look at that and I think, well, I like this, but you know, suddenly there was a million bands that sounded like that. And then it kind of seemed like that was the point where you guys just went, okay, we're going to make a left turn and we're going to not cut our hair. We're not going to dye our hair. We're going to embrace these influences that we always had.
Yeah.
Because that's our version of the counterculture, because what these people are doing is very conformist and lame and kind of stupid, really. I mean, you know, a lot of it's like, you know, you're just being a kid or whatever. But was hardcore really great motivational experience of what you didn't want to do, sort of thing?
Yeah. Well, it's like the history of hardcore in Los Angeles is very strange because, you know, like the Descendants and Redd Kross members and everything, we were all like the only people who listened to that kind of music in our giant high school. So all of a sudden there was this high school in Huntington Beach, which is an extremely Republican section of Orange County, and there was all of a sudden there was this influx of all these young high school punk rock kids and these bands, and they were our age, but they were kind of like a lot of them were like the assholes that we went to school with, so they kind of, you know, so for us being where we were at that time, it was just, you know, violence was also a part of it. People were just being really gross, and the early bands were just kind of harsh. They were all tried to be like, they all were into like Sid Vicious, and they all sang with really thick English accents. So that's what I always thought of as like hardcore. And like, of course, people like Black Flag and the Circle Jerks were smart and they embraced it. And that's how they got in with the giant, you know, this new burgeoning suburban punk rock market. You know, we were like, it was too close to where we came from. So you know, you
actually went to those schools. You actually knew that high school, and yeah, it's like suddenly all these assholes show up, and it's like you have like this cool clubhouse, and all of a sudden all these dicks show up, and it's time to build a new clubhouse or treehouse or a new fort or whatever.
Well, I remember like, you know, the Edison High School, which is Orange County, it was, you know, it's like an hour from where we live. This girl I knew, she was very excited about that prospect of there's others like us. And so we ditched school one day and drove out there just to kind of like, you know, see what it was all about. And it was, you know, it was just the vibe was like, she loved it because there was all these guys and she instantly got into like the boyfriend thing. For me, it was just like the bands were just shitty. And I was like, no, this is not happening. But I mean, but hardcore as hardcore, if you think of like the Bad Brains and stuff like that, that's not the same thing, you know. But at the time, it's before that stuff. But at the time, it was like I just had to shut my ears to anything that was post, you know, original scene. And later years, like all my friends who are like my age, who are like record collector geeks, who love obscure hardcore and all that, I understand it now. I like it now, but at the time, it was like the early inklings of hardcore were invading our turf. So we had to create, which was good for us because we had to eventually create our own thing again, you know. We kind of learned how to do that constantly, just kind of like what Madonna does, you know, just kind of reinvent ourselves constantly.
Redd Kross, Madonna, all the great reinventors.
It was a skill. It was a skill set we learned from, you know, kind of, because it was paradise. Like when the summer of the church or whatever, you know, it was like it was just like the guys in Black Flag who were like the older brothers, you know, they were, and then, you know, Frank and Bill, the Descendants, you know, and they're our age and they're totally weirdos. They're just complete weirdos. And then there was like the cute other girls who were a little bit older, who are also from Maricosta, like the original punk rock girls, who are very, you know, very mystical to me because they're older and they're from the original Hollywood scene. And that was just a neat little bubble. But, you know, like the adult Jeff knows, and you can't live in that kind of place forever. As I see when I look at people on Facebook reminiscing about the old days. Just, I mean, I appreciate the old days, and all music I listened to was made yesterday. But yeah, you know, but I there's not a certain time that I just stay in.
I think like Kiss in the mid-70s would have been my version of, you know, because they were like my gateway band that introduced me to rock music.
Right. And they were for tons and millions of people.
Oh, yeah, they were like the Beatles of the 70s.
Yeah, it's true. Very, very, very true.
As much as people who hate Kiss don't want to admit that, but that's exactly what it was. They were like, you know, they were that kind of thing. They
kind of died for our sins, you know. It's like I remember like the Kiss, but I mean, I hate to be a braggart, but, you know, I saw Kiss Alive tour, and Steve probably told you, you know, it's like saw like the greatest moments in Kiss. Kiss Alive tour, we was there for the Live 2 recording or whatever, the fake recording. And by the time, like, I remember after, like, in that kind of Teen Babes My War period of the 80s, I don't even know what that is, early 80s, I guess. That's 84. When like, I started rediscovering Kiss because I had put Kiss away years ago. It's like they're ridiculous, but they were. I started, you know, going back to the old records and Alive, and like, oh my god, this, you know, Deuce to me sounded like a punk rock garage song, and it was essentially. It was, you know, it's like Kick Out the Jams or any of those kind of type songs. But to admit to you that you liked Kiss at the time of Dynasty or a little bit after Dynasty was like the record. No, maybe it was after Dynasty. It was like when they were in that kind of unmasked phase.
everybody in our age group that liked Kiss basically jumped off, 90% of them, when Dynasty, because there was too much other stuff that was way better, whether it was more extreme.
And little kids.
Yeah. I mean, like, you know, I was a snobby little kid. I thought you know, so I was too big for my britches to enjoy Dynasty, and here comes Judas Priest, and here comes a billion other things. Not even punk rock, you know. But yeah, anyway.
But I think, well, that was our thing. We had the foresight enough to jump back on, and I think when we jumped back on, it started. A lot of musicians that were in our age group started like, oh yeah, Kiss, you know. Didn't matter, you know. They were able to kind of look back and then really just absorb the, you know, the impact.
Yeah, that stuff is good. When people talk about how bad they're, I mean, you write songs, you're a songwriter.
Yeah.
Kiss wrote good, catchy hard rock songs.
Right.
You know?
They did.
Yeah, you can't say otherwise. And they were smart enough to package it in something that was really like for Alice Cooper's, beyond Alice.
Yeah.
You know, that's incredibly smart.
Yeah.
So
Well, and their music was also, they were smart also because in that time when their first albums came out, that's when prog rock was really big. And I remember borrowing my uncle's Yes records and pulling out and then see like the whole side as one song. And it'd be like, ah. And Kiss started doing Return back to the 3-minute song. With Kiss Alive, of course, they had to, appease the drum solo and the various guitar solos. But for the most part, it was like a solid record of 3-minute songs, like Beatles type format songs. So that was right before the Ramones and Cheap Trick, because seeing like that's what I loved about Kiss. And then when I saw Cheap Trick open for Kiss, it was like, wow, you can remember all their songs after only seeing them once. And I had never even heard their record. I'd seen them in Cream, in the back pages of Cream. And, and it just kind of returned back to that format, not really knowing in your brain that that's what they were doing to us. That, that return.
Yeah, like the first Cheap Trick record, I was like, that's such a incredibly great record all across the board. And I was just a dumb little kid. So when I got it, I thought the liner notes were real. I thought that, I didn't know any better. I was like, oh man, that's weird. The drummer's from Venezuela. Interesting. But that stuff was all really good. And I guess I already said that. But so what was going on when after Teen Babes and you got Robert Hecker to play? All of a sudden, it seemed like well, first off, I know you guys toured the country for the first time in 1985, right? Because I know you played here, Raleigh.
Yeah.
And what was it like touring the United States for the first time in your own band in the year 1985? What was that like?
Well, in 1985, there wasn't really a solid network of touring network. The Black Flag offshoot, I think, what do they call? They had a booking agency. They were just starting a booking agency based on some of the trails that they had carved out through their own kind of experimental touring. So we didn't know anything about. We bought a secondhand Brady Bunch station wagon and a couple of friends, and we just showed up to those gigs, not knowing if anyone would show up.
Right.
And it was a great adventure. It's exactly what you would think like a Redd Kross the beginnings of Redd Kross would be like, or in a Brady Bunch station wagon, showing up for these gigs, and sometimes there are people there, sometimes there wasn't, and running out of money. Oh, I remember like one of our tales is when the whole tour was being financed by our show at the Danceteria in New York, and so it like we would get paid $200 if we were lucky, all the way to New York, from LA to New York. But once we got to New York, about week 2, we played Danceteria. It was a great show, and they paid us like $3,000. So we'd never been to like one of those weird kind of druggy mafia clubs, but that place was completely just questionable, and they paid us like an enormous amount of money for us. So we're like, okay, it's easy street, we'll be able to work our way back home now, and then it's fine. But we get to Boston, and Robert went to make a phone call, and Robert was the treasurer because he was we smoked weed and we were not reliable. He was the complete straight edge nerd in our band, and he lost the $3,000 in the phone booth. He left it in the phone booth. I know. And we do not come from a wealthy family, but our parents were like cool enough to like wire us like $500, and we kind of just inched our way back. So, it was an amazing adventure, and more like a Mormon mission, rock and roll mission. But it was great.
Right. So what was going on when Neurotica came out? Because Neurotica was, in my mind, without knowing, especially back then, not knowing what was going on or whatever, it seemed like that all of a sudden you guys were in Cream magazine. I remember seeing you guys not just interviews and Cream, but you got to hold the Cream beer cans and stuff.
Yeah.
What was it like? What was going on climate wise when you put out Neurotica? How was the reception? And then the last thing to tie it in, what was it like working with Tommy Ramone as a producer?
Well, Tommy Ramone was actually we were so pop. We were so into like classic pop at that time and psychedelia, not like psychedelic music, but the mindset. And I was obsessed with Phil Spector and obsessed with early Sonny and Cher records. And our whole thing was we wanted to get Sonny Bono to produce the record. Number one. And what we weren't like trying to be funny or anything. It's like we just thought, oh, let's just be the most incredible, we'll add the punk and then Sonny Bono will bring, I guess in a way it's kind of like the Ramones working with Phil Spector. Then it's like, and then
it's actually just like it.
And then our second choice was Tommy Erdelay. And, the Ramones records were, they were like Beatles records as far as I'm concerned. I loved the way they sound, especially the second album, which was their kind of Meet the Beatles sounding album.
You mean Leave Home? Is that the second one?
Yeah, Leave Home. Leave Home is the poppiest.
Right. And also all three of the first three, all three of them sound radically different from each other. And they're all done by the same Tommy.
Yeah. Well, the first one's like an 8-track. The second one's like they're kind of trying to figure it out. I think the first one's Craig Leon, right? I don't think Tommy produced the first one.
That's the one where it's like Dee Dee's in one speaker, Johnny's in like it just sounds really lousy in a really appealing kind of way.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the ways I learned how to play guitar. Because I knew I couldn't learn Led Zeppelin songs, but the first Ramones album, you can just turn Johnny off and play along with it. And it was, oh, wow, learn the whole record. And by the time you learn that whole record, you understand how to write a pop song, or at least you get an idea of all the familiar changes. And you're like, oh, well, these are the same ones that the Beach Boys and the Beatles are using. Oh, this is how it's kind of a Rosetta Stone for a young kind of non-musician.
Sure. And it sounds like material-wise on Neurotica, some of those influences were certainly funneled into the songwriting. Were you the main songwriter except for the couple songs that Robert wrote?
Yeah. And that wasn't by design. It was kind of like I was the one who would come up with stuff faster, quicker. And then I kind of just turned into like the lead singer. It kind of all happened organically, because it used to be more split. I was always a lead singer, but then after I put the guitar on, it was always Steven and me. Sometimes Steven actually sang more than me. By the time Robert was in the band, we all had found our lane. It took us a while, but yeah, I wrote majority of the songs, about 70%.
Yeah, right.
In those days,
right. But the reaction to Neurotica was really good.
Well, we didn't. Yeah, we didn't know. It was hard for us to gauge. There was no like, when you put out an indie record in those days and there's no internet or anything, you do the one tour that you can manage to do, and if people show up to the shows, that's the only way you can tell if like the record, people did like the record or not.
Yeah. Well, it just seemed like climate-wise at the time. The reaction at the time of Neurotica is obviously a lot different than the reaction in time of, say, Born Innocent. Hardcore was over pretty much. There was all this other stuff going on that was really good, that was impossible to ignore.
Right.
So it seemed like it was climate-wise. It just seemed like different times.
Well, that was that whole time was when college radio became the big thing. So you would have you'd have Husker Du, and then there'd be the early REMs who were like the REMs, and the U2 were like the Beatles and Stones of that college rock, but then everyone below it were like, weirdo bands, like the later SST groups, and people forget about college radio thing was for a good maybe 5 years really steered the pre-MTV rock and roll.
That's how you like Husker Du made their jump. The Replacements were suddenly a known band because of college radio, and
right.
that Redd Kross was probably played on college radio, and maybe the Dream Syndicate and things like
Yeah,
that.
totally. Yeah.
There had to be a home for all that stuff, and people forget they used to call that stuff college rock
Yeah.
for lack of anything else to call it.
That's what college rock, and then it kind of mutated into alternative. But wasn't the magazine Alternative Press was a college rock magazine? Maybe that's how that turned into alternative. I don't know the origins of it.
It's so long.
Yeah, because they used to have CMJ. They had the college trades at the time. They were like Rolling Stone and Variety for college rock music. Like CMJ, they had the charts, and I think Alternative Press was one of them. They were, glossy magazines.
Spin magazine was popular.
And Spin kind of came out of that. Yeah, because Spin had college charts in it when it first started.
Right. Well, when you guys got signed to Atlantic to do Third Eye, did that record come out after grunge happened and after punk rock sells lots of records happened? I don't remember.
No. It predates that stuff by a bit, and so we were just kind of out on a limb during that period. I think what was happening in Los Angeles, it was like kind of like Poison and that kind of stuff. Like the only band you could stomach out of that whole movement was the band magazine movement was Guns N' Roses, and those bands were already big,
Guns N' Roses, who obviously, if you've heard Aerosmith, just weren't that big of a deal when they came out. But if you never heard Aerosmith or the Rolling Stones, much less the Rolling Stones, but certainly Aerosmith. Aerosmith, not Aerosmith, Guns N' Roses, stuff like Jane's Addiction was big.
Yeah. Jane's Addiction, yeah.
Jane's Addiction they have a couple songs that are pretty good, but
Chili Peppers were also the odd band out that was big at the time.
Yeah, and I'm sure most of those people are pretty cool, but I wasn't really necessarily a big fan of it. And then here comes Redd Kross Third Eye, and that seems to be, you guys must have been really out on a limb during that period.
Yeah, I mean, because there was no scene, there was nothing really happening, and it was just kind of us out there, I think with the hair metal stuff, that kind of mid 80s, I think what got us through that was our people became like the members of Sonic Youth and the Butthole Surfers. Those became like the bands we hung out with, even though musically we were way more straightforward than them. It's like that's how we dealt with the hair metal scene, because those were our age peers, the people in those bands, the band magazine hair metal bands, and they were very much kind of like the new version of like the early Huntington Beach bands. It's like this again. But yeah, so Third Eye is a weird album, came out at a weird time. I mean, I think Atlantic Records, big record that they were working on when we put that out was Electric Youth by Debbie Gibson. There was nobody. So it was like kind of like they saw that we were very popular and our audience was very dedicated to us, and there was all these labels came and they all wanted to sign us, based in New York. LA, they didn't want anything to do with us. And we've chose Atlantic. They had the coolest reputation, but yeah, you realize you become like this poker chip, that the way they operated in the majors in those days was just like, oh, you throw it against the wall. If it sticks, you take it to the next step. You don't give a group 3 or 4 albums to develop like Aerosmith did or whatever. They no longer did that anymore. I mean, so so if you don't have a hit record, if you don't like within the first couple weeks, right away if they're just gonna like, okay, your record's done. It's just like whatever's left in whatever's left in the bins is that's what's left. And so we were basically told that we were dropped on that tour, like the second leg of that tour, by someone who worked there, someone who was a big fan. And she told us, and like I felt nothing, it's like we were like, did a really great show, and like Atlantic dropped you, this woman. So she was crying. I was like, oh, really? I was like, that's a bummer. But then we had been through so much shit. We figured, oh, we'll just do something else when we get back. You know,
If
there
we
was like, I
survive,
guess,
yeah, if we survive Posh Boy Records, certainly we can survive Atlantic Records. What's the big fucking deal?
yeah, I think we were just kind of programmed at that point to like never quit, no matter what, you know, just kind of just keep staying musicians, keep being artists. I mean, that's why I always feel like, this is another thing I know as being someone in my 50s and having a period where I was a musician. I mean, I was in a band from the time I was in my early teens. And then, you know, in my 40s, I stopped for a while. I think maybe it was my 30s, late 30s, 40s, like 10 years I didn't play. But the whole time I was just always doing something or creating something. I figured, okay, being a rock musician, being a musician, being a writer, it's an orientation. You know, it's not something you choose to be. Like once you've actually stepped into the world of being an artist. It's like, oh, you're an artist no matter what, no matter if what you do is good or bad or nobody cares. No, it's still you're thinking in those terms.
Oh yeah, or like if you said, oh, you play drums. It's like, yeah, I play drums off and on, but like I'll just be sitting there and like I won't even I'm not conscious of it, but I'm always doing that. I'm always thinking about that. I'm thinking about music, even when I'm, being kept awake in the middle of the night by my daughter or whatever. I'm just
right.
It's like a coat you can't really take off. The coat,
right.
The coat chooses you.
Yeah.
Before you had that break, I think the next record, Phase Shifter, with the reshuffled lineup.
So we had like after Third Eye, you know, the shows were okay. You know, people were showing up. We were doing interesting tours, and you know, so we weren't as discouraged as you would think. We might be like, we're like, what's the next step? And then we're like, let's just go to, let's go to England. I think what happened was the Teenage Fan Club were a big fan of Teen Babes from Monsanto. They had discovered a lot of that music from that. And so they offered us a tour and we just started doing singles and went back to the basics. And it was so much fun. And, and then eventually we went back into the world of making albums again.
Right. And that record is like, I think sound-wise, Phase Shifter, and some of the songs on it are like some of my favorite Redd Kross songs. Certainly Jimmy's Fantasy, especially. That's like, and production's really good, and it's a pretty powerful sounding record, straight throughout. And then did the Wilderness Years happen after the record after Phase Shifter?
What years?
Your Wilderness Years? Were you?
No. We did. We did Phase Shifter. We toured for like 2 years, and then we had another record. We did another record called Show World for them, and then after that, after we hit the road for Show World, that was when Nirvana were starting to have big problems. We were managed by the same company, and it's when Kurt started going off the rails. So all their attention was with them, and at the same time, the entire recording industry was being purchased by a booze company. So again, after Show World came out, it was just a matter of time. Because I remember we went on a press tour, like a radio tour, Stephen and I, just a talking tour, and then we found out like, oh, U2, who were label mates, because we were an Island subsidiary, had just put out their new record the same time, and they were gonna, the same radio stations in England and stuff. So I was like, ugh. And so, but it didn't really kill us, because the Seagram's company eventually did. Because I think it was Seagram's initially who purchased all the major record labels and did some weird consolidation, and everything was just turned upside down for several years until it kind of fixed itself. I think, I don't know. I haven't been on a major label in a long time, but we deal with them with reissues. That's another thing about going back to Third Eye. Third Eye, once it started, it's kind of been in some form of print for ever since we released it in a non-Atlantic way. It just, labels always put it out, that we've always licensed that record. So, it's and the same thing with, we started doing that with Born Innocent show worlds. So we still have to deal with like, you know, Universal and stuff to get the rights to put our own records out, or, you know, but yeah, it's so confusing. But yeah, after show world, it was a bit of like, it was like we had worked from after the end of Third Eye through the end of the show world tour, we had consistently just been just, you know, just becoming and just building a musical identity and recording and starting, you know, basically starting over again. It was really fun and very rewarding. Changed some members. And then by the time, there was so much shit that was happening when we did our last shows for the show world tour. It was just like, Brian was the first, our drummer was the first one to jump. He's like, I can't go on anymore. I can't, because he was just fried. And we're like, it's cool. You know, we never officially broke up, but it was like, there is no intention of getting the band back together. Though, so we broke up with him, and like he quit, but that was basically, we broke up then, but we still did a tour of Japan before this. So our last shows were in Japan. I think Hawaii was our last gig on the way back from Japan.
So that's kind of like the Walker Brothers or something. They break up and then they go to Japan, and then go ways after. Scott goes on, does his career.
Yeah, well, we had been to Japan before. We did the Japanese thing for Phase Shifter was the first time we did it. And we were in a lot of like the more teeny bop magazines at the time. And so when we got there, it was like all the little girls, you know, it was just like insane. It was like the Monkees. But then, you know, the show world was a couple of years later, and the shows were all like, everyone was more grown up. So we found them like the music nerds and the kids that were like the little girls that turned into music nerds.
Right. Well, since Researching the Blues came out, onward, it's like there's been obviously a lot more activity since those days, which has been kiboshed by the pandemic. But what do you think of the? I know it's impossible to really step back from the band that you sort of helped create with your brother years ago, but do you have like a different sort of appreciation for doing Redd Kross in recent years because everyone's still alive, and do you does it feel the same, or do you appreciate it more because of for any reason at all? Or
yeah, well, no, I mean, it's amazing that the energy. I was so re-energized by our first gig that we did after my hiatus. You know, like I didn't really know if I'd ever play live again, and we had just said yes to a gig, and in the I guess it was in the early 2000s. I don't even remember anymore, but it came back so easily. So every time I've done a show since then, I mean, there's been a few burnout shows where it was kind of like fried, but for the most part, it's always very non-jaded. You know, it's just like I appreciate every moment I get to perform. So it keeps it, you know, I think that's how it, you know, I'm able to keep doing it and with a certain amount of energy because, you know, because I went without it for a while. You know, and now I really appreciate the fact that there's an audience too. I mean, after all these years that people would come and see any of our bands, it's just crazy. And you know, it's like so many years have passed. I talked to Steven, we were talking about we were talking about the passage of time, and we were talking about the Lunatics. The Lunatics are playing with they're playing at the Punk Rock Bowling, and I was thinking, wow, they just played a couple of years ago, a few years ago. They toured with they opened for the Go-Go's, and that was like, you know, that was, and I was like, oh my God, it's 20 years ago. that you know, like when that they toured with the Go-Go's on one of their later tours. And I'm like, oh shit. And then I was thinking, we're thinking like, that's 20 years, but it feels like it was yesterday. It feels like it was just, you know, a couple years ago. But when we started playing music and you know, we started playing live in 1978, the White Album was only 10 years old. Sergeant Pepper was only 10 years old.
No, I've had this conversation where it's like you go forward from this moment, like from the 80s going forward. That's what fucking 40 years ago. Go 40 years in the other direction. What the fuck was going on 30 years ago. And like, I'm talking to you about all this ancient history, but it doesn't seem like ancient history to me, even though I know it is.
Well, think about the young bands of 1967. The young, wouldn't have had much of a audience in 1977.
Yeah.
But the young bands in 1978 from our class could still have, an audience 20, 30 years later. It's insane.
And also with the advent of the internet age, just the fact that like I used to always joke that after hardcore and punk rock was over, there's all these phases that if you like music, you end up always going through these phases. So there was like the 60s Nuggets, Pebbles phase that everybody has to go through after they got burned out of punk rock, if they haven't really heard that stuff before. There's all these kinds of, and a lot of that is just now is because of the internet, because now you can just just research anything and it's there.
Yeah, and it's there, but the weird thing about it is you still have to know what to look for. So there's still a bit of a, people like you and me, we know what to look for, but I mean, young people like who are like our age when we started, they're going to only have to stumble on really great stuff. You can either stumble on it or have some basic germ of an idea what you're looking for to go back to hearing the source of anything that's good that's happening now. So I mean, it's the great rock and roll educators, like someone like Bob Dylan is, like someone like Bob Dylan, or like the way the Rolling Stones were, like they always cite their heroes. Like, if you're into us, you go back and listen to this from like 1906, or or this record from the 50s. This is where we get our stuff from. And then it's fun to go, oh, well, Howlin' Wolf, what did he listen to? Oh, he was into country music. It's like, oh, that was, Southern Hillbilly. Oh, that's weird. Then you start getting weird. That's how you learn about history.
Sure.
And that's how research should work. So I think some Googling stuff, sometimes it's a little too simple. And I think people get really weird ideas.
Well, especially when they like stumble. I feel like a bunch of people have stumbled upon certain things that just aren't really that great, but through sheer force of personality through the internet. It's classic. And it's like, man, I was around when this stuff came out. This stuff was fucking bullshit, man. And all these like young kids are thinking this was the holy grail, and this was like the laughing stock of my high school. Like that,
Well, but then there's also that kind of revisionist history when it comes with punk rockers too. It's like veteran, certain punk bands. It's like kind of rewriting history. But whatever.
That's fine. But it's kind of like they romanticize all the stuff that I cared the least about.
Right.
Like they romanticize conflict with people and violence, and especially the punk rock hardcore stuff.
Right.
They don't really talk about how exciting and fun it was, and instead they focus on this us versus them horseshit. And and a lot of people do that. It's
kind of like the Republican Party. That's like that kind of early Orange County. It's the same thing. It's like us against the man, but really you are the man.
Rage against, but ultimately become part of the machine, kind of stuff.
I don't know. I have no idea. I'm completely. It's going to take me a while to return back to like any kind of normal as far as my brain capacity.
I hear
everything. It's kind of like this guy, this kid we knew. He became a submarine pilot. I mean, he joined the Navy and would be stationed in submarines for years. He was into punk rock, so he'd come out after months in being in a submarine and say like, the trippiest thing about leaving a submarine is like seeing things that are further than 5 feet away from your face. You're under there for like 2 months and that's all you see, So that's like kind of the way it feels like not leaving the house that much. It's just, I guess that's the cabin fever.